If you ache for truth, goodness, and beauty, if you're hungry for a Christianity with substance and strength, if you long for a faith that's big and bold and biblical and all about Jesus Christ, if you're inspired by the idea of one church that has spanned 20 centuries, 24 time zones, and 2 hemispheres, enfolding every race, nation, and language, then you're considering Catholicism.
We have been talking about 7 deadly sins.
We have.
Which is something that in the Protestant church, we don't talk about them that way. It's not like in the Protestant church, we think those things are okay. We don't think that.
Right.
But we don't dwell on them. And this just occurred to me this morning. The Protestant church service, as we've talked about, revolves around learning the Bible, learning God's word. But here's what struck me today. It's almost always big picture stuff that I hear in sermons, overarching themes. Here's how the Old Testament relates to the New. Here's how this, whatever. But never specific sins. I never hear sermons about specific sins. Nobody ever gets up, not in my experience, very seldom. We're going to talk about pride today and how you should not be proud and here's what you should do and you should pray. And then afterwards, if you feel like you've got this problem, come up and pray with us because
I'd say that I'm not sure that is inherent in Protestantism. When I was a Protestant pastor, I can think of a few times of getting granular, but I would say it's a key part of American evangelicalism, right? And in the kind of contemporary churches that you're a part of, where it's a contemporary praise and worship Bible church, is big picture thematic stuff, not granular, except increasingly to the degree that they are going woke, that they get really granular on racism or climate change or whatever, right? I mean, those are the new granular
sins,
new granular sins, right? But your point.
But the thing is that when we do talk about sin, it's always in the context of being freed from it. Jesus has come and freed you from it, so you're fine.
Well, I think that's true. I think that's a really good observation. I think in that world, to the degree that you talk about sin, it's something that's kind of in the rear view mirror. It's the sins that we're freed from, the sins that Jesus frees us from, without really taking sin seriously, as an opponent, as a disease. I mean, I heard, I mean, if we took sin seriously as a disease, right? Like you would take a disease or a virus or something, and we took it really seriously. Certainly we don't take those kinds of sins. We don't give them the same level of examination that we do on one side of the aisle with climate change or systemic racism or whatever, where we get super granular into the types and typology and causes and solutions, right? But, when was the last time you heard that kind of thing about, pride or envy or wrath or lust or gluttony? Right. Well, we just don't talk about those.
It's what you said. Those things are in the rearview mirror. And I think what I have seen over the course of my life is a gradual and then ever faster sort of dive down into, well, it's okay. That you want to live with your boyfriend or your girlfriend. Hey, that's okay. God loves you. And name a sin, name any sin.
It just occurred to me. I hadn't thought of this before. So maybe this isn't very, this is going to be, fully baked here, but you always think about these like time travel scenarios where you say, if I could go back in time 500 years ago or something, and I could, with all the knowledge that we have now, or sophisticated scientific knowledge, what could I teach people back then? Right. And so we think, well, if I could only go back and teach people hundreds of years ago or whatever about the germ theory of disease.
Right.
And if I could go back and teach them why they shouldn't drink the water and they should boil the water and understand germs and understand antiseptics and how people get sick and how infections, right? Oh my gosh, I could, really change them because, people are back then were drinking bad water. I mean, like these Civil War things were earlier where the doctors in the Civil War tent or something are amputating one guy's leg with a bone saw. Then they go into the other guy and they're not sterilizing the instruments because they don't understand the germ theory thing. And then everyone's getting infected and dying, right? So we always have this kind of idea that we have all of this technical scientific knowledge, and that if we could only go back in time to earlier eras, they would benefit from knowing all of those things, and particularly things like the medical things, what causes diseases and how people get sick and whatnot. So here's my kind of half-baked idea. What I think is interesting about the 7 deadly sins is, what if people from 1,000 years ago could come forward today and teach us about things like pride and envy and gluttony and wrath and the 7 deadly sins? Because much in the same way that they maybe didn't understand the germ theory of disease and why people kept getting sick or infected, right? Or, getting the plague or whatever, because they didn't understand, those medical concepts, and how much they would benefit from us being able to explain that to them. In the same way, we no longer have the knowledge that they did of the things that affect our souls. Right. And when you look at this sort of knowledge of sin and the kinds of things that are, thousands of years of knowledge and reflection on the 7 deadly sins, where you talk about these are the things that are mortal sin that will separate from God, much in the same way that these germs or viruses or whatnot, are making people sick. These are the things that are making 21st people sick in their soul. Right. And in some weird way, like if we could trade them knowledge, I'll teach you about germs and viruses if you'll teach us about pride, wrath, envy, gluttony, and so forth, because those are the things that are making modern people sick.
Right. And the other seems more important. The older seems more important. I mean, you let's say that by knowing about the germ theory, you could add 30 years to your life.
Well,
you're still going to die.
Yeah, I don't want my child to die from infection because if I had only known better. But to your point, by the same token, I don't want to go to hell. Right. Literally, I don't want to go to hell because nobody bothered to tell me about pride, envy, wrath.
It never made sense to me all these years that when I was told that, these you don't have to worry about sinning. It felt to me like, well, Jesus has got you and he'll never let you go and you don't have to worry. And I'm thinking, well, couldn't I walk away? I mean, couldn't I just walk away?
God, So this is the whole thing about, I mean, this kind of extreme evangelical notion that you're just saved by the act of acceptance. So if I say that I accept Jesus as my Lord and Savior, that simple act of faith or acceptance then cancels, This is the evangelical story in this. Then it cancels the debt of sin against me. All of my sins, past, present, and future, are not held against me. Right. All debts, past, present, and future, are canceled against me because I made that act of acceptance. Right. And what's weird about that, is nobody thought that. Nobody taught that. Scripture doesn't teach that. And this is where the Reformation and the Catholic Church separated over some of these issues. But I, having been a Calvinist, having been a Protestant, came to the realization that the Protestant position is sort of incoherent. A couple of weeks ago, I shared an episode when I got back from the Holy Land, Holy Land Diaries, and I was talking about, and the first of those, if you haven't listened to that, Holy Land Diaries, on the first one, I want to talk about the Sea of Galilee. And we went while we were in Galilee. Oh, why? Let's not wind. By the way, we are, letting people know, this is the first day of spring, and we
are back at the secret compound.
That's right. We're back at the One Rolling Adventure secret compound.
I think we should post one photo and see if the dudes on Reddit can pick up on the
metadata,
the audio and all the stuff and see if they can.
I don't know if I want them. I don't want to, like, this is like the Bat Cave. I mean, you can't find it unless you get directions.
I picture a group of Protestants and Catholics rumbling over there across the field over here.
They're gonna find the Bat Cave out here in the piney woods. So anyway, dear listeners, if you hear the pines whistling or the birds chirping, we are once again at first of spring back outdoors. So anyway, back to the Sea of Galilee. You know, when we were up near Capernaum, as I shared, there's a beach there, which is the location where after the resurrection, when Peter and James and John and Andrew and a few of the apostles went back up to go fishing in Galilee, like returned to their former lives. And Jesus met them on the beach, showed up one morning out there, if you recall the story and from the Gospels. And Jesus is on the beach one morning and he calls him in, right? And this is where he restores Peter.
Mm-hmm.
And I described all this in that episode, so I won't take so much time doing here, but just to recall for people. So Peter, on the night before the crucifixion, had denied 3 times that he even knew Jesus, right? So 3 times you deny me, and the cock crows, right? So on that beach that morning, he restores Peter, and also it's really establishes the primacy of Peter among the apostles to lead the church. But one of the things that he does there is he asks Peter 3 times, "Do you love me, Peter?" And 3 times Jesus says, "I do." And so the traditional gloss on this is that the 3 denials are counterbalanced by the 3 affirmations of love by Peter. What I said in that episode, though, is I think that location brings to mind, and that story, I think the perfect illustration of the Catholic view of faith and works, kind of how we're getting into this, because he says to Peter, "Do you love me?" And Peter says, "Of course I do. Yes, I love you, Lord." And he goes, "Then feed my sheep." And then a second time, "Peter, do you love me?" He says, yes, I do. "Feed my sheep." And the third time, "Peter, do you love me?" And it says that Peter at this point is wounded and hurt. I do. Why do you keep asking me?" He says, "Then feed my sheep." And the point that you'll make is that it's not just enough to say that you love me.
Right.
That love involves an action. So if you love me, you will go feed my sheep, go care for my sheep. And if you won't go care for my sheep, then it's hard to say that you really love me.
Right.
Or that you're acting on that love in a way that makes it real.
Right.
So bringing that back to this discussion, if I say, come down on the altar call at your contemporary church while you're playing the keyboard and the fog machine and the colored lights are going or whatever, and I come down and I accept Jesus as my Lord and Savior, but then I go out and I'm still consumed with wrath and envy and gluttony and lust, the one answer is, doesn't matter. Go out. Consumed with wrath, gluttony, lust, and everything. That's not good. No Protestants think that's good. But in a sense, they're saying it doesn't matter.
Right.
Because all of your gluttony, lust, envy, past, present, and future is wiped out in that moment of acceptance. But back to the thing with Peter and the thing, how can I say that I love you, Lord, if I am not transformed by that or don't act on that?
Right.
And this is where we get into the saying, well, then am I earning your salvation? No, you're not earning my salvation. I'm making my salvation real. I'm working out my salvation.
Right.
I'm acting out on it. I'm making it real. I'm the sanctified. We've talked about this endlessly on the podcast. So I think that the 7 deadly sins are important, like you say. So often it gets talked about in contemporary evangelicalism in a rear view mirror kind of way. Like these are the things that Jesus saves you from. But these are the things that I need if I love Jesus and I accept him my Lord and my Savior, that I need to turn away from.
Right. Right.
And I need, by the help of the Holy Spirit, to, in a sense, cure in myself, because it's not enough to say that I love him if I allow these things to consume me.
Right.
Without, now I can't ever perfectly purge myself, which is why we have the sacrament of confession and reconciliation and all these things. I can't ever completely purge myself of them. But if I'm not going to do, in a sense, do the work to make my salvation tangible in my life. And this is where they don't get talked about, because really what we should be doing in the church is you should go in every Sunday, right? But you should be going in and hearing, hey, people, this is pride, this is envy, this is wrath, this is gluttony, this is lust, right? This is, right? These are these things. These are all diseases of the soul.
Right.
And just as I said earlier, just as we might want to go back and tell medieval people about physical diseases and viruses and germs and whatnot, ancient people or Christians or medieval Christians might have a lot to tell us about curing our souls.
Right.
And we should be aware of these things. We should be studying. We should be as conscious of these things as I am about my physical or medical safety. We're concerned about our health and our wellness and our safety,
right?
But not the health and wellness and safety of our souls.
And this is where I love that the Catholic Church gives me forms, things I can do, physical things, confession, reconciliation, and so forth, whatever. Otherwise, what am I told? Well, I have a problem with wrath. What do I do? Well, just pray. Just,
Right. Right. What am I supposed to do about it? Well, nothing. And this is the thing that's striking as we'll get in here to the sin of the day, but right, like when it comes to these, we have 2,000 years of writing on these things. That Chesterton quote about the Catholic Church is the only institution that's been thinking about thinking for 2,000 years. We have 2,000 years of the writings of the saints and doctors of the church and apostolic teaching that, just even preparing for today's episode, and I knew which sins we were going to talk about, it took me, 2 minutes on my iPad, right, just to refresh my memory about some things. I went to some sources and go, oh my gosh, if I wanted to, I could sit 6 or 8 hours and read from any number of saints, like just hundreds of pages of, in a sense, dissecting, just in the same way that if I wanted to go and read about the things that we worry about today, which are physical health and physical wellness.
Right.
I could go find hundreds of pages about diet, nutrition, heart disease, this, that, 1,000 other things. I can go find hundreds of pages in an instant using the Google machine of the writings of the saints and doctors of the church and apostolic teachings about wrath and envy and pride and gluttony. And not just what it is, like from an abstract theological standpoint, but practical things. Like these are the ways it manifests itself in your life. These are the ways you combat it. These are the ways that you lean into it. These are the ways that you, this is the way you try to combat it and make yourself better. And again, all of that, it's like 2,000 years of information lost.
Right.
As I said with the time machine thing earlier, like just, there's all of this knowledge that we just don't know. And we don't know, just as they didn't know why the plague was killing people. They walked around with those weird, remember the bird?
Sure,
But plague doctor outfits where they bird mask or whatever it was. And they walked around, or they carried roses in their pocket because the good smells to combat the bad smells. And we laugh about that, right? We're like, oh, how silly those people are. They didn't understand, right? And you go, but they would be looking at us going, these people don't understand why their souls are sick.
Yes. Now, we're going to talk about wrath. I have a little story I'm telling on myself here. It was really, I was a little more wrathy in this story than I feel good about, But anyway, it took place in a McDonald's drive-thru, as you might expect.
Most stories about Ed.
That's unfortunately
many Ed stories begin or end.
Unfortunately. Anyway, so I was in the line, and it was the two lines, right? And then there's this sort of jockeying for who goes first, right? Well, this woman whose turn it was not, it was my turn to people up ahead. I was on the inside lane and I had already ordered, and I pulled up and she finished up ordering and she whipped around sort of in front of me. And I thought, oh, no, you don't.
Oh, no,
no,
you
no,
don't.
no, no, no. And so I inched forward and she inched forward, and she was, it looked to me like she was willing to like trade paint with me.
Oh my God.
She was just willing. She just wouldn't
This is
look.
getting exciting.
She wouldn't look at me, and she just kept going. And finally, I'm an inch from her door with my bumper.
Yeah.
And she just wouldn't give, and she went around, and I was really angry. I was really angry. I was wrathful. It was bad.
Wrathful. Yeah.
It was bad. And so every time she moved forward, I would roar up behind her within an inch of her bumper, revving the engine and just letting her know that you don't do that to me, right? So I get up to the pay. She pulls ahead of me, and she's getting her food, and I'm at the pay window, and I hand the girl my credit card, and she says, "Oh no, you're all set. The car ahead of you paid."
Ah.
And I sat there thinking, this rotten person cuts me off in line. And then, as I was telling my wife later, she had the gall to pay for my meal and make me feel even worse. I felt even worse then. I wanted to go on with my wrath because it was kind of delicious, you know. I don't know. I still don't. I don't even know who it was. I'll never know. It was
God
hilarious.
knows.
Right.
Someday you'll meet her in heaven.
So I don't have a lot of, right off the top of my head, questions about wrath, about the Catholic thing. But I do have a question that maybe you can get to maybe later in the podcast. Is wrath a sin if I don't act on it?
Yeah.
Asking for a friend. That's
Asking for a friend.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's talk about wrath. That's the sin of the day here.
We'll get back to the conversation in just a few moments. But first, I'd like to ask for your support in producing and expanding this podcast. It's produced by a 501c3 nonprofit ministry called One Whirling Adventure, with a mission to excite and educate people about historic Catholic Christianity and to equip them to live, share, and defend it in the 21st century. Now, the production budget of this podcast isn't big, but it is real. We've set a goal of 40,000 worldwide downloads in 2023, with a crowdfunding goal of $35,000 to make that happen. Would you help us make that happen? If so, please go to consideringcatholicism.com. You can see our GuideStar charity rating there and donate online with a one-time or recurring gift. And if you have a business or organization interested in sponsoring our ministry, please shoot me an email, greg@consideringcatholicism.com. Thank you for listening and considering helping us to help others consider Catholicism. And now, back to the conversation.
Let's distinguish right away. Let's talk about anger. Okay?
Yep.
Because the 7 deadly sins, it doesn't say anger. And here's why. Anger is an emotion.
Mm-hmm.
Like happiness.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yep.
Or maybe hunger is more than an emotion, right? But let's kind of talk about, sort of emotionally hungry, but right? There are certain feelings that we have: angry, sad, happy, hungry, sleepy.
Right.
Right. And those emotions are kind of like energies, if you would think about it that way. I don't mean in some like, woo, like a new age way, but I mean, it's like, if you think of it kind of an energy that can run through your body, right? And it can either be directed to a positive or negative end. So let's take happiness, for example.
Right.
Being happy sounds good, right? What's wrong with being happy? But what if what makes me happy is like totally perverted and wrong and hurts other people, right? But what if I take joy and pleasure in something that's twisted or perverse or harmful to other people, right? Now, I could say, well, what's wrong? Shouldn't I be happy? Well, not happy in that.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Or what about sad? Being sad is a legitimate emotion. There are things I should be sad about. There are things I shouldn't be sad about. If
Right.
if something happened to somebody and the lady who got ahead of me in line or whatever, right? That becomes envy, right? I mean, I could be sad about things that I should be happy about, or I can be right, or hungry.
Right.
Like hunger can be a good thing, except if I'm hungry for foods, or if my hunger has no end, and that's when we get into gluttony.
Right.
Right. I'm hungry for lunch, but if I, just keep eating lunch for 6 hours,
Right.
at a certain point it becomes gluttony. So what I'm trying to say is that the emotions or the feelings or the energies are in and of themselves not necessarily good or bad things.
Right.
They are.
They just are.
God made us as human beings, and we have emotions, and those are part of what God built into us. And anger is one of them. There are things, but to what determines whether that anger becomes a sin or the deadly sin of wrath, one of the things that determines that is to what end it is devoted. Just as I said a moment ago, being happy is fine unless what makes me happy is perverted and twisted and harmful to other people. And being angry about certain things can be valid because Scripture is full of examples. Jesus was angry, right? So when Jesus goes into the temple and he sees the money changers in the temple that are blaspheming and profiting on the poor, Jesus is angry, overturns the tables, makes a whip out of rope and starts whomping on him, right? He has a righteous, justifiable anger about something that is unjust, right?
Mm-hmm.
So anger is an emotion, if it's directed to a correct end, is a feeling. We've talked about this before. Part of Catholicism, the worldview of Catholicism, involves an understanding of ends, E-N-D-S, like telos, right? So, we're sitting at a table here, right? And we've talked about this before. The end, the purpose of a table, tableness is something that you can put things on and sit around, right? And if you can't put things and sit around it, it's not a table, or it's a broken table, right? And so a lot of what determines within the sort of Catholic worldview the legitimacy of things is the end to which they are directed. So if I see, for example, let's suppose I walk out my front door one morning to let my dog out, to do its business, and I look next door. Not that this would happen because I love my next door neighbors, but hypothetically, right? I look next door and I see a guy who's beating his child, right? Abusing his child. And I might I should probably feel a rush of anger about that because it's an injustice. It's a horrible thing. He's over there abusing a child. If anger does not arise in me at that moment, there's something almost broken inside of me. Right. C.S. Lewis talked about this in one of his books. He talked about how the emotions are, you'll appreciate this as being, Ed the Protestant, that the emotions are like the keys on a keyboard, on a piano keyboard. And that all of those keys, also those black and white keys, have their proper place. And that part of education or spiritual formation or maturity or wisdom is knowing which keys to play in which order at which times. So, for example, he says, if I'm walking along a frozen lake and I look out there and I see a child has fallen in through the ice and is drowning, I may feel fear, but the correct thing to do is to summon up
the courage,
the feelings of, courage and whatever else that makes me put my fears aside and jump in the lake to save the child, because that's the right thing to do. So anger is just a feeling. The sin of wrath is when that energy, and let's think of it as energy, like it's like rocket fuel. right? Like like high ethanol, fuel, right? Race car fuel. And the thing about anger is it really is like a powerful emotional fuel.
Yeah.
And therefore it's combustible. It's dangerous.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because for a couple of reasons. One, it can be directed to the wrong end. So when you go back and you look at Catholic teaching from the saints and the doctors of the church and apostolic teaching, the 2,000 years of the Catholic reflections on wrath, there's a lot of conditions, like, those medieval people I talked about coming forward and, teaching us. There were a lot of things that are written about what are the conditions when anger is legitimate or illegitimate, or when it trips into wrath and becomes sinful. And one of the things is whether or not the thing that you're angry about is a legitimate injustice.
Right.
Right? Because, and whether it's proportionate. So if the lady cuts you off at the McDonald's drive-thru, it's an inconvenience.
Right.
Right? Maybe it's rude, but it's a minor inconvenience and minor rudeness. And at the end of the day, it, wait 30 seconds longer to get your Diet Coke and your fries or whatever, right? So it's to have this kind of disproportionate anger directed.
Right.
And then to what it's directed. Is it directed to the lady? Is it directed at McDonald's? Is it directed to this country, the kind of country, and how it's going to hell in a handbasket where people just cut each other off in the McDonald's, right? I mean, do you see how quickly this becomes directed to weird ends and to the wrong places? So, and becomes disproportionate. And the another condition that the medieval, the doctors of the church, the ancient and medieval doctors talked a lot about was whether or not, in a sense, you have standing, whether it's any of your business.
Right.
So I could look at not because my neighbors are great people, so I don't know. But I could look at somebody who's abusing their child, and the next door neighbor's abusing their child, and I could say, well, in a sense, I am invested in that because this is a neighbor, this is a child who lives in, and they are within my sphere of ability to do something about it, right? But this is where I think that social media and 24/7 cable news have really, really thrown gasoline on the sin of wrath.
Yeah.
Because what we do now is we are consumed, and I know so many people, Ed, all you have to do is take 2 seconds and go on Twitter or whatever, or we probably both know people on both sides of the political spectrum that spend all their time listening to political stuff on cable news or talk radio or social media. And they're endlessly outraged. It's this rocket fuel of anger that consumes. I mean, this energy is super powerful. And after a while, they actually like being angry. This is like powerful. It's a drug. It's a drug.
Yeah.
Right. It's like it's like cocaine or something, right? And they just it hypes them, and they're amped, and it becomes a purpose. And so now I'm outraged about, pick whichever thing it is, or whichever side of the political spectrum you're on. But that is this, thing, and then you hear what they did, and it's like ding, every 10 minutes is another news cycle, and they don't even understand that these media businesses are actually profiting on selling you that drug.
Exactly.
And I'm not saying there aren't things out there in the world that are unjust, that we shouldn't feel some righteous anger toward. But they want you sitting there clicking refresh on your Twitter feed, or clicking or staring at the cable news, waiting for every 6 minutes. We have breaking news about something that happened somewhere in the last 6 minutes. There was some congressperson who said something outrageous. And that you can be, I always use a bad word, but ticked off about. And then it's a dopamine hit. Right. I mean, and that's exactly what it is. It's a dopamine hit. It's like it gives actually your brain this jolt of dopamine, which elevates you just like a cocaine shot.
It's outrage porn.
It's outrage porn. And it's like, I'm not nothing to be outraged about. And after a while, all I have is the outrage. And it isn't directed to any constructive end. If I see my neighbor abusing his daughter in the backyard or something, then I'm going to call the police, or I may, depending on the circumstance, I'm watching her physically be, I may go over there and intervene because right? So there is a constructive end to it. Jesus sees the money changers in the temple and he goes and he drives them out.
Right.
But for me to sit there and have outrage porn on cable news 24/7 because congressperson or presidential candidate or whatever, so-and-so, did you hear the latest outrageous thing that they said 6 minutes ago? And every 6 minutes, they got to drop a new headline breaking news. I mean, this is sick. And it's what it's doing is, so it's anger that is no longer proportionate. It's no longer directed to any constructive purpose. It's no longer anything that I can specifically do something about. Right. It's just me being consumed by the energy of being angry. And at that point, it's no longer just a feeling, it's a thing that begins to take over. You know, I do some work. I have another podcast that I do about neurology, neuropsychology. We talk about neural pathways. And what happens is people's neural pathways get grooved. So this is why when you look at, for example, drug abuse. So take the cocaine thing or pornography. What happens is a neural pathway gets grooved to do that again. And it wants to keep going back to doing that thing that it's grooved to do. And when you've grooved your anger and it becomes the fuel that you live on, you need it. Like the drug addict needs the drug. It's the only thing that gives you, and here's another thing where it really consumes you, it's the only thing that gives you purpose. I get to be the angry person who's, angry about everything. And at that point, this is not a legitimate emotion that has arisen in reaction to an injustice about which you have the capacity to do something in a constructive end to it. This is now a thing called wrath, and it's taken over. It's a disease in your soul, and it will corrode your innards. It will rot you from the inside out. And I know people who their life is defined by wrath. And when we talk about that being a deadly sin, early in the episode we were talking about, can you say I accept Jesus and then, all of this is, how can you, when Jesus says, Peter, if you love me, feed my sheep. Jesus says, follow me, put me first, do the things that I care about. And how can you do that when you are consumed and your mind and your heart, and your emotions and your neural pathways and your energy level and your purpose, your reason for existing now is defined by this wrathful anger.
You're serving a different master now.
You're serving a different master, and you can no longer hear him. And here's the thing is you've lost control. You no longer have the ability to direct, to make rational choices, because the anger drives you rather than you controlling the anger. And that's going to be true when we talk about the others, whether it's gluttony or lust or anything else, is when it controls you rather than you being able, like the piano keyboards we talked about earlier, rather than you being able to say, hey, bad guy raping the little girl over there, intervene because this is unjust. That's one thing. When this now defines you and consumes you, you no longer have control over it. It controls you. Now, I want to say another thing, because watching the time here on this episode. So we've been working through this scheme on the 7 deadly sins. And I think we said in the first episode of this little mini series that there's 2 sort of lists of 7 deadly sins. And you can go back and listen to that. There's one list that is tracked to the theological virtues and the cardinal, what's called the cardinal pagan virtues. This other list, we're working through a different scheme that comes from the early church, from the 5th century on. Thomas Aquinas talks about it, that sees the 7 deadly sins, and then it looks at each of them as a disease with an antidote. So there's a corresponding virtue that is the antidote to this disease. Right. So the antidote on that list, the church's list for wrath, is something called meekness. I want to say something about that real quick. Meekness, or meek, is an unfortunate English word. You know, there's a lot of words that we have in English, or when it comes to Christianity or the Bible, that obviously, when Jesus on the Sermon on the Mount said, "Blessed are the meek," he didn't say the word meek. How do I know that? Because the word meek is an English word. And English hadn't been invented yet. He used a Aramaic word that was translated into Greek. And then it has come down into our English Bibles translated as meek. And the reason why I think meek is an unfortunate word, and we could talk about some other words that, you know, are like this, is that it has connotations to us today that are not the connotations that it would have had at that time, the original word. And one of the, I think, just unfortunate things about the word meek is it happens to rhyme with another English word, weak. And in our mind, we played a word association. To be meek is weak. Meekness is weakness. But that's not what the original word, when Jesus said, "Blessed are the meek," he did not say in Aramaic the equivalent of "blessed are weak people," and "blessed is the weak," weakness. That's not what he said. The word has to do with the capacity to control and direct your anger, to have that in a measured way where you're in control of it. Just like that example of the piano keyboard. I know that when I see something that is A, legitimately unjust, B, that God has put in front of me, or I have it affects me, or it affects somebody close to me, or it's within my sphere of influence and I can do something about it. And 3, when I have the ability to make to address it constructively, then I direct the legitimate, righteous emotion that I have towards constructively addressing that thing. Meekness, as he talks about, as Jesus talks about, and the church has always understood it, is that ability to sort of rationally have control over that. You know, to have, we talked about how Aristotle, and then later, remember in the Dante class, he talked about how what it means to be human is to have reason and will. Reason is the ability to know what is good, and will is the ability to choose it. Wrath overcomes both our reason and our will. We no longer think clearly, and we no longer can choose clearly. When Jesus says meekness and leaning into meekness, it is, in a sense, a form of self-control in this area of our life. To know that. So let's ground this. You know, I look at things every day that I feel angry about, as I'm sure you do, and not just people cutting in front of me, but I mean, I turn on the TV or flip open, the internet or whatever, and I see things in the world and, in current events and everything else that I feel the emotion of anger about. But to be meek is to know, to not allow that to become outrage in me, because some of those things God hasn't put in front of me. And there's nothing that I can construct. So I can recognize an injustice. I can recognize a wrong in the world. I can see something in current events and I can say, that was wrong. That was unjust. What does God want me to do about it? Has God made me the president? Has God put me in a place to do something about it? No. Is there something I can constructively do with this? No. To the extent that I can do anything constructive about it, like come on my podcast and talk about it, well, that's something that I can do. But for me to allow that rocket fuel of anger to become outrage porn and cancel out my reason and will, in some sense, makes me less human. And people have pointed out, Jesus says, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. It's interesting, that verb, inherit. What it doesn't say is, it doesn't say they shall take the world.
Right.
Right? Because
Right.
that's where what they've done is they've learned to control those emotions.
Yep.
And to measure those things and to direct their emotions towards constructive purposes within constructive limits, and know where their limits are, and in a sense, what God wants to apply themselves to and what they don't. So, for me, like, I think all of this got so much worse in the last number of years because of social media and 24/7 cable news.
Yep.
And I think that it really got bad in the last few years with, some of our politics and COVID and this and that and the
Yep.
elections. And now on both sides, people are just, and whether it's, whatever the issue of the day is, transgender, blah, 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 or whatever, pick your thing. But people are just consumed with outrage on both sides of every issue. I try to be well informed.
Right.
So I'll kind of look at the internet, and there's certain news sources that I go to sort of figure out what's going on today, certain things that I'll skim, articles that I'll read, a couple of news sources on, TV or media that I kind of check out. But I can't watch this stuff all day. And partly because there's nothing and that's one of the things I think COVID taught us. There's nothing God hasn't put there. There's nothing I'm going to do about it.
Right.
The things that God has put in front of me to do today, I'm going to apply myself to those things.
Right.
And if there's something that God wants me to direct myself towards, he'll put it in front of me in such a way that I can do something about it. And then that anger, if I feel angry because, like I said, the abused child or this or that or whatever, then I allow that to take action. But other than that, I'm not going to sit and let this thing rot my soul. And I know too many people that it is just rotting their soul from the inside out.
Yep. Good stuff, Greg.
All right. Well, that was a long diatribe about anger. See, I'm being outraged about.
Yeah, I'm sitting here being angry that you're going too long.
Yeah, I know. Oh, wow. And, the wind is whistling through the pines, and wow, we went really long on that one. So, all right, dear listeners.
See you next time.
See you next time.
Thank you for listening. My name is Greg Smith. And if you've enjoyed this podcast, would you please hit the like and subscribe buttons wherever you get your podcasts? And please share it with others. And if you're curious about the Catholic worldview and faith, the Church and its saints, or Catholic history, culture, and art, then visit consideringcatholicism.com. And email me to let me know what you think. Greg@consideringcatholicism.com.